Hey guys, I'm Forrest from the YouTube channel Hashoshi, and you're listening to the What is Crypto podcast.
What is going on, guys? What is going on? Welcome to another episode of the What is Crypto podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about the Bitcoin blockchain movement. We dive deep into the concepts of what's going on here, and we help educate you as a listener and even as a beginner into what is important and who and what you should listen to. Today's guest is Hashoshi, aka Forrest. Hashoshi is an Ethereum developer, a blockchain developer. I know he develops on multiple different blockchains, but he is also a YouTuber. He shares on his channel Hashoshi the benefits of blockchain technology, as well as reviewing many different products, many different platforms, and much, much more. I love his YouTube channel. This guy's really smart, and I'm excited to dive into the conversation today with him. Today, we're going to be talking about quantum computing. We discuss what is quantum computing. We discuss how will it change the way that we view normal computing. And to be honest with you, I just try to wrap my head around what he's talking about. This conversation is deep, but it's interesting, it's informative, and it's unique. I think it's a conversation that is extremely relevant and that we all need to be having and we all need to be discussing. Finally, guys, again, we are not financial advisors. Please always do your own research before making any investment in anything, and don't listen to anyone who tells you you need to do something. If you want to make an investment, make sure it is the investment that you want to make, because we don't give financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, so just make sure you stay safe out there. If you want to ask questions about this interview or any other interviews, come over to our Facebook group and have a discussion. Or if you want to listen to any of our interviews completely unedited, you can do so on our Patreon page by paying a very small fee. You can learn about both of those at whatiscrypto.com. All right, guys, enjoy the episode. So, what is quantum computing?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. So quantum computing is a next generation computing technology that has exponentially more power than traditional computers that we have today. This quantum computing technology, instead of using transistors and electrical pulses within silicon chips, uses raw electrons and photons called qubits to facilitate that same binary zeros and ones operation that we get in our current computers. So this idea has been around for a long time, but the tech is only just now starting to become viable as we've figured out the technology to harness this power.
Okay, cool. This is definitely going to be something that I know absolutely nothing about. So can we start by maybe talking about regular computing and how quantum computing differentiates itself?
100%. So in a classical computer chip, like one that we're working with right now, a series of microscopic transistors are woven together into silicon. That's what creates these chips. And each of these tiny transistors are capable of being in a state of positive or negative or a high and low charge. In the computer's terms, this is evaluated in a 0 or a 1. And these are our bits, the main building block of computing. So now we have these huge drives and super powerful computing chips that have sort of taken us away from the very basics of computers, which were just bits and bytes, right? Zeros and ones. When you hear that common adage about computers thinking in zeros and ones, that's what this is all referring to. It's those transistors within your computer chips, and everything that happens on your computer is facilitated through different combinations of zeros and ones within all those different transistors inside your computer chip. So inside the modern computer's chip, there are enough little microscopic transistors to match the number of stars in the Milky Way. So it's an insane number of these transistors today. And even then, the abilities of those transistors to calculate things are still fairly limited in comparison to quantum computing bits that are called qubits. So instead of having these little mini transistors inside a silicon chip, qubits are essentially photons and electrons isolated inside this super cooled vacuum. And then they're manipulated by stimuli from scientists that are studying how these things work. So instead of electrical pulses changing the charge on a transistor, qubits are changed in terms of their polarization or the way that they're spinning by scientists stimulating them. And one of the benefits of using a quantum bit or a qubit instead of a transistor is that it has some really interesting capabilities. A qubit can be simultaneously in the state of 0 and 1. So your ability to calculate is exponentially more powerful because it can simultaneously be spinning and be in the same state, or 0 and 1 at the same time. This is called superposition. And that's really the key to quantum computing and the reason why we're so interested in them, because from a technological standpoint and from a basic computing state standpoint, qubits are more effective and more efficient than transistors are if we can just control them effectively.
Interesting. And what would be a use case for this form of computing?
Yes, there are a ton of use cases. A lot of people are talking about the ability to use quantum computing with all of its prowess in terms of making complex calculations easier, in terms of making next generation artificial intelligence. So there's one that was basically trying to implement algorithms with quantum computing to help aid in testing drug formulations and running models on drug formulations to help scientists create better and better drugs faster. Because now we use computers to help map genomes and how people's bodies will react to medicines and how to reformulate medicines, but it's still really, really slow because of how limited modern computers are relative to what quantum computers could do. So there's the thought that quantum computers could enable the next generation of artificial intelligence aided medicine design.
Interesting. So this is something that you're saying could affect like multiple different industries, including kind of like taxes or things like that, and could improve upon the traditional ways of computing.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you always hear quantum computing in such a negative light. Like, well, quantum computing is going to destroy modern cryptography. While that's the case, and it's possible, there are a ton of other reasons why people are developing quantum computing. And that's because it has a lot of other really valuable potential opportunities in all sorts of industries. It's the same sort of paradigm shift or generational shift we had when we went from doing a lot of this mathematics manually to modern desktop computers that can do relatively crazy stuff compared to where we were with ease.
Interesting. So you're saying this is kind of a similar jump from where we had big ass computers that were sitting in someone's bedroom or an entire room of the house where people would do all their computing there to moving towards a laptop. This is, am I understanding that correctly? This is kind of like a similar technology jump.
Yeah, this is a generational shift in computing for sure. And it's something that is going to take time to hone into a consumer product, but we're going to see enterprise level quantum computing long before we see consumers get their hands on these types of computing technologies.
Okay. And I mean, I'm already having a hard time wrapping my head around like the potential impact of this. I think it's very similar to like when people look at Bitcoin and blockchain. They don't necessarily look at it and they say, okay, I see why blockchain could be important, but they can't necessarily grasp the whole concept of how this is going to impact multiple industries. And I think I'm kind of having like the same effect with quantum
Mhm.
computing. Like, is it just going to make things like a lot faster, or is it going to change like the way that we share information?
I think the way that you can think about it is this. We have really powerful computers today, and we have expensive, monstrous supercomputers in the world today that are capable of doing insane calculations at insane speeds. Quantum computers, even relatively weak ones, in theory, put those supercomputers to shame. So, our ability as a society and as enterprises, for example, to perform calculations and to create algorithms that have never been feasible from a physics perspective could be unlocked by quantum computing because we have limitations on the transistor sizes that we have, the ability to just create a larger and larger and larger computer with more and more and more and more available bits or transistors to work with. Quantum computing sort of raises the bar. It gives us a much more room to create these algorithms that have a lot of value across different industries that once were not possible.
And the core question that I have, and I think the core discussion of this, which has been, I've had a few discussions around this topic, but what does this mean for Bitcoin? Does quantum computing pose a threat for blockchain and things like that?
Yeah, quantum computing poses a threat to all modern asymmetric cryptography. And I usually say in my opinion, but it isn't even an opinion. I think that's just a fact. Quantum computing does pose a threat to these systems, but it also poses a threat to modern banking, to pretty much all the encryption that we use today out there on the internet. So this is a problem that affects everyone, not just Bitcoin and crypto and blockchains. I think the timeline is the thing that people always argue about and say, well, I think it's 10 years away, or I think it's 20 or 30 or 5. That's where the argument comes. But yes, it definitely is a threat.
What kind of a threat is it? Is this like a threat as in it could shut down the Bitcoin network? Is this a threat as in it could potentially hack the Bitcoin network? Is it a threat as in my personal wallets are at risk for being hacked? What kind of a threat do you mean?
I think all the above, but I'll walk you through just generally what the main risk is. So, pretty much all blockchain ecosystems, including Bitcoin, use asymmetric cryptography for sending messages. And that's why when you have an account on the Bitcoin network, really that's constituted by a set of keys. You have your private key and your public key. And these keys are really just, in terms of your computer's understanding, are just massive prime numbers. And they're mathematically related to one another. You share your public key with the world. That's how people encrypt messages that only you can decrypt with your paired private key. Now, the reason why this form of encryption works is that these numbers cannot be reverse engineered very easily. So if you have a private key that creates a public key, if someone has that public key, they can't feasibly take that public key and reverse engineer your private key. If they could, then this key would be useless, right? Everyone knows in the crypto space, your keys are the most important thing. You got to keep your private keys safe. So in that case, if we had computers that were powerful enough to reverse engineer a private key given a public key, then we're in trouble. And that's where quantum computing poses a potential threat, because the math behind creating keys is all about prime factorization, which is basically finding the two prime numbers that multiply to create that massive key value, that massive prime number. If we could figure that out with a computer in a short amount of time, then that could potentially break modern asymmetric cryptography. And that's where people say, okay, quantum computing has the ability to perform mathematical operations far more efficiently, far faster than we've ever found in the past. And there's an algorithm called Shor's algorithm, Shor apostrophe S, that is a theoretical algorithm used to factorize prime numbers quickly. And people say quantum computing has the ability to implement Shor's algorithm and effectively threaten that prime factorization process behind our asymmetric keys, and conversely our Bitcoin keys, our Ethereum keys, etc. That's where the main threat is from a blockchain perspective. And asymmetric cryptography is used everywhere. So every time you're on the internet, pretty much you're using asymmetric cryptography in the background.
Are there any positives to this quantum computing in relation to blockchain technology, or is this kind of something that may make it extinct and may force us to look at different alternatives or create new alternatives?
I think it depends on how we react to it. I think people that look at where we are now, and we are not close to having to really stress about protocols being broken or our modern internet and encryption being threatened. But we do need to be thinking about how we can solidify a strategy for when it is a problem, how we react to that, and how we prepare for the advent of a quantum computer that is capable of factorizing prime numbers effectively using Shor's algorithm and could potentially break public private key pairs. If we're thinking about that now, I think we have a much better chance of preventing problems. And there are a lot of really intelligent people and organizations thinking about it now because they realize that you don't wait until the problem has shown up on your doorstep to prepare. So the positives would be quantum computing can also be used as a tool to secure blockchains too, right? So it's a threat on one side if it's used for a negative purpose, but it's also a powerful tool to make our protocols better and to potentially give us new methods by which we can reach consensus. I think that's the powerful thing.
And I know we talked a little bit about it earlier, and it's hard to estimate these type of things. But what do you think, time frame wise? When do you think this could be a real threat to Bitcoin? And I guess I'm asking so that I know when to sell all my Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think, there's so many different opinions on this, and I've gone and given talks about quantum computing in academia, and I've had professors of cryptography say that they think that it's going to show up in 30 years and we have so much time to think about it. And then I've had other people also in the cryptography space who say, no, I don't agree. I think we have 5 to 10 max. So I always like to err on the side of extreme caution, right? So I'm always the person who says, let's prepare as early as humanly possible. And worst case scenario, we come up with plans to mitigate these risks long before we need them. That's my opinion. But I also look at it and substantiate it in this way. So if we think about another really challenging problem that people thought we'd never solve quickly, and that was flying, right? The Wright brothers proved the concept of flight in 1903. And less than 11 years later, the first behemoth prop engine commercial flight carried passengers across the entire state of Florida. No one believed in 1903, I'm sure, that they'd see people flying in metal airplanes in their lifetime, and they did within almost a decade. So what do people do when they're faced with challenges that we don't think they can solve if we look at history as a guide? They beat them, they do things faster than we thought, and timelines that we give always get blown away. So I don't like to bet against humankind and when it comes to innovation. So in this case, I'm saying we have 5 to 10 years and we should bet on 5. And if it takes longer, then we're still in the winner's circle.
I love it, man. Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come discuss these questions with us. This is a topic that is it's deep, man. It's very much over my head when you're talking about the technicals of it. It's something that I really know very little about, but I appreciate you coming on and educating myself as well as the listeners a little bit here.
Yeah, 100%. Always happy to come on and talk about these things. I think, in the end, quantum computing, even if you don't understand the deep technical computing side of it, I think understanding that it is the equivalent of the move from big, like room-sized computers to laptops and desktops we have today, and then also big desktop computers to us having a supercomputer in our hands in the form of smartphones that can do amazing things in their own right, and they're super tiny. I think that it's that same generational leap. It's just going to change a lot of things for a lot of people in industry.
All right, guys, that was a fun interview with Hashoshi. I want to give a big thank you to him. And guys, I also want to give a big shout out to him. If you want to follow more about what Hashoshi does, head over to his YouTube channel. A link will be in the description below. Guys, I'm not going to lie. This conversation is very, very complex for me. It's something that I've learned a little bit about. I understand the very basics about, but there's a lot deeper conversation that we will be having around this specific topic in the future. So what I want you to do, guys, today is just go on Google, search what is quantum computing, and read 1 or 2 articles about it so that you get a little bit of a better understanding of why this technology is so important. Finally, guys, please give us a rating. Please write us a comment. Please subscribe to us on iTunes. It means a lot to us. We're also on other platforms like Spotify. If you want to subscribe to us there, you are more than welcome to do so as well. And we will catch you in the next episode.